because the desert's a really healing space. Part of it's the climate. There's nothing better than warmth for your body. If I were to describe the desert, it's like when you walk into the sun for the first time in a while and you actually feel the sun on your skin, like that is here. And it's so healing. And I think people definitely come here to run away from something and just sort of take a deep breath and get back to who they were before, maybe.
Hi, and welcome to the Desert Lady Diaries podcast, 30-minute conversations with women who have found their home in the Mojave Desert. I'm Dawn Davis, and this is episode 140. There's more information about the podcast at the website, desertladydiaries.com. And to engage with guests, listeners, or me, follow and like Desert Lady Diaries on Instagram and Facebook.
Adriana Lopez-Ospina was born in Chicago and raised in the Coachella Valley. Inspired by Bogota, Colombia's most prominent museum, the Museo del Oro, Adriana becomes Pura, a Colombian-American mixed media artist currently working on her series All That Glitters is Fool's Gold. This Museo del Oro is home to the largest collection of gold artifacts in the world. These artifacts serve as a glimpse into the life and memory of the indigenous communities that lived in present-day Colombia. As a Colombian born in America, Pura is only now starting to learn about the deep cultural significance gold had to the indigenous communities that her family comes from. In her work, she aims to reflect on her connection to the indigenous community whose traditions lay the foundation for the myth of El Dorado. She strives to reconnect with her indigenous roots by creating images of her life and memory in gold as those who did before her. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. Thanks for being here. So usually the first question is, what was your first experience with desert? And your experience was being raised in the desert, right?
Yeah, I barely knew Chicago. I was born and then my parents moved here right away. So it's just been warmth and sun and desert since I remember, really.
Yeah. Do you have any specific memories, like desert-specific memories of growing up in the valley and then maybe going off someplace and seeing other places that weren't desert? Because it does have a distinctive topography and feel.
Absolutely. While I was growing up, we traveled a lot to and from Colombia. So being raised here was very different because my parents are actually from a mountainous area in Colombia. So we would go there and it's a lot more humid and cold. And when I go there, I feel completely alien. So I leave and it's completely different everywhere else because there's actually climates. And in the desert, if you don't know the desert, we only have summer and less summer. So, I mean, anywhere else I would go, it would just be a shock completely. I don't own clothes that are seasonal. They all just kind of work in the desert. And if I leave, I really have to plan and think and look at the weather. So, I mean, leaving the valley, or something that's very here is the mountains that are desert, as opposed to mountains everywhere else which are very foresty. And that's always something that's stuck with me, just being able to watch a sunset, and it's a lot more scenic. It's not fuzzy around the mountains the way it is in other places. It's very outlined as it would be in a painting.
Yeah, I love that when the sun goes down here in the West and you start to get those more defined yet smoky. They look a little smoky.
Yeah, there's like 4 different types of purple that they turn into. Those layers on layers and layers of mountains. It's unlike any other place. It's so beautiful.
I like to say a different artist paints the sky in the morning and the evening.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's exactly it. There's no better way to capture that view.
Do you remember the first time that you left the desert and went to Colombia? Were you super small?
Yeah, super small. We would go in the summers because childcare, I mean, here in the US, is super expensive. So my parents, what they would do is actually fly us to Colombia, and they would leave us with my family members while they kept working in the summers. Being on a plane since I was a child, but the first time I really remember it, leaving and seeing, we'd go all the way to LA, and here, if you know the valley, it's the view of the windmills, like leaving, and all of the desert around it. It's so iconic for the Coachella Valley. If you come and go here a lot, that's like the sign of you leaving and coming back, and it's so welcoming. It's like one of the best things of coming and going from here. It's so fun just to be like, oh, I'm home. I see the windmills.
Exactly. When I first started coming here as a new resident, that was the biggest thing was, or I would text, somebody would say, text me when you get home. And I would text them I'd say, I'm at the windmills. And they would
Yeah.
know that
Everyone knows, like, oh, yeah, that's it. You're 30
You're
minutes
there.
away. That's nothing.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Being raised in the Coachella Valley, were there many other Colombian Americans
No,
around?
actually, if you are Colombian, you know every other Colombian. So Christmases and New Year's, it's a very Colombian tradition called novenas. And novenas are basically 15 days of prayer before Christmas. And as a Colombian community, we would come together and we would all do a potluck of Colombian food, of buñuelos, which is different from Mexican buñuelos, and tamales. Colombian tamales are different. Arepas is like very Colombian. There's not a lot of other places that make arepas. And for 15 days, different families would host all of the Colombian families in the valley. And it was really nice to just come together. And I'm not very religious or faithful, but just the practice of coming together in a tradition that was very Colombian specific was so beautiful. There's probably only like 10 other families in the valley.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
It's pretty tight knit.
Yeah, that's small. Tell me about arrapes. What's the ingredients in that? How do you make that?
Arepas, oh my gosh, they're so good. They're basically like fat tortillas,
Ooh.
and they're a little bit cheesier. So, I mean, I guess they're not so far off, but it's definitely a different taste because there's more masa, which is, that like corn,
Mm-hmm.
like
It's
that
kind of like a
made of.
breading almost, right?
Yeah,
Like soft.
exactly.
Yeah.
But the one that's a lot more different than any other food is the buñuelo. And a Mexican buñuelo is like a fried tortilla with sugar on it. But a Colombian buñuelo is a fried cheese bread. It's just like a ball of bread and cheese, and it's the best thing on earth.
There couldn't be anything better.
Honestly,
Bread makes everything
it's the two
better.
best foods put together. I mean, if you ever go to a Colombian restaurant and you get the chance to try buñuelo, it's totally worth it.
Oh man, I'm gonna make sure of that. So you grow up in the Coachella Valley, and did you stay in the Coachella Valley? Did you ever leave the Coachella Valley?
I left for about 5 years to go to school. So I decided, I'm going to just do it. I don't really like the Coachella Valley. A lot of people who ended up staying here, there wasn't a lot of opportunities when I was younger that I saw if you stayed. And it was basically that I was going to go to Northern California for school, UC Davis, or I was going to go to St. Louis University, which is in the Midwest. And I decided, I've already done California, even though Northern California is different. I was like, I want to do seasons, like full 180. I'm going to have full on winter, fall, spring. I'm going to experience what it's like to be in a completely different climate. So I chose to go to St. Louis University, and it was like night and day. I never really understood that seasons were real. I thought it was more cutesy, the way you see in movies, and you go and you're like, oh my gosh, wow, how fun is the winter? Oh my gosh, winter is the worst thing on earth. To a desert native, I still can't get over it. I mean, I had seasonal depression. I didn't even know that was a thing until I left the valley. And winter, I didn't even have a coat when I left, and winter hit and I was like, oh shoot, I need to buy a coat. Like, I'm not ready. I only had crop tops. I was going to parties in the middle of winter, like in crop tops, and like, you couldn't even imagine. I mean, people were literally like, wow, you couldn't be more Californian. You couldn't be more desert than that. It was so funny.
Oh my gosh.
But yeah, I left for 5 years. I went to school for 4, and then I decided to stay for an extra year for work. And then after that, I was like, I can't do another winter. It's just not possible.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I grew up in New Jersey, and of course we had snow and winter there. Shoveling the sidewalk and the driveway in the winter time was just a drag.
I mean, luckily I didn't even have to shovel or anything. The school does all that. I don't know. I couldn't have done that on my own.
So now you said UC Davis, and I kind of know they're kind of an agricultural focused school. Is that what you were studying?
No, so that's why I decided not to go there. I know that UC Davis is one of the greatest schools, but it was so agricultural, and their arts program, they have one, but I wasn't really drawn to it in the same way that I was to St. Louis University's. I went to school for studio art and biology. I actually started as a pre-med student because both my parents are doctors. And then the more I did chemistry, the more I figured out that it was just not for me. And I always knew the art was something I wanted to do, but I didn't want to disappoint my parents. So I was kind of like, oh, I'll double major. And then I was like, just kidding, I'm only going to be an art major. And I took all these science classes, so might as well get that minor in biology. But yeah, no, I definitely stayed away from that because it was so agricultural. It just wasn't for me.
How did that university get on your radar?
I went to Xavier here in the Valley, and they're a Jesuit high school. So then they kind of tried to funnel you towards Jesuit universities. So then that's when someone brought it up. They were like, you would get part of your tuition paid because you are from a Jesuit to Jesuit, high school to university. So that was great. And they just were telling me Gonzaga, they were telling me just all these Jesuit universities. And that one stood out because it was in a city as opposed to most other ones that were kind of more bumfuck nowhere. There's no other way to say it, but like I really need to be connected, and I can't really be out in nowhere's land. So
right.
Yeah.
My niece grew up in New Jersey, and she did her first 2 years at Purdue.
Oh, really?
And but she said, it wasn't for me. She goes, they just don't get my sense of humor.
Makes sense. Honestly, it was hard sometimes to find community in other places that people are like, oh, Midwest people are so nice. And I'm just like, I feel like we don't click in the same way that maybe like West Coast people do.
Exactly.
It took a minute for sure. I was a little bit not sure that it was going to work out. I really thought I was like, maybe I'll just switch to UC Davis at one point, but then no, it ended up working out.
Yeah. Let's talk about Museo del Oro and your Colombian background and how this gold fits into your artwork and where you come from.
So basically, every time I would go growing up to Colombia, that was just one of the things to do. It's so inexpensive and it's so culturally relevant to Colombia. It's like I said, or like you said, I think in my intro, it has the largest collection of gold artifacts in the world. And that's pretty rare for a country because of colonization and things like that. Most countries don't get to keep their own artifacts. They've already been basically robbed of their culture. And it's great to go to Colombia, and they actually have held on to so many of their artifacts. And Museo del Oro is really one of those places that's so special because it has so much pre-Columbian artifacts that give a lot of insight into what it was like in just all the indigenous cultures and communities that were Colombia nowadays. And so when I graduated from school, I graduated with an emphasis in sculpture, and I was doing metalwork. I was welding. I was doing this, that, and the other. I graduated as a poor college student, and I was looking into setting up a studio for that. And they were basically like, steel's going up in price. The equipment for welding is like super expensive. So is all tables, saws, like everything. You know what everything for a studio. And it was just not realistic. So I started to think, what does it mean to work in metal? What does it mean to be an artist where I'm not prompted to do things like I am at a school? So I just started looking and thinking about what moved me about myself, and what moves me about the world. And at the time, there was just a really huge cultural shift into Indigenous rights. And I was thinking so much about how Colombia it's very interesting. It's in the middle of where Spain is very like European and very culture, blah, blah, blah. And then there's Colombia that's kind of right there where people value Colombia as right below being like a colonizer. They're very close to being a developed country. But there's also very close to indigenous communities. So it's right in this weird middle of culture and still being very affluent. And I wanted to sort of dig back into my own roots because our family is very moved away from that. I didn't really grow up with learning anything about indigenous culture, about our roots. I would ask my parents, who were like, oh, we're part Italian. I was like, like this much Italian. We're Colombian. Where is the other side, right? Why do we say we're Italian? Why? Because the world wants to hear that you're white. So it was really hard for me to hear, like, where else do we come from? No one knows in my family. So then I always just thought of the Museo Loro and how much they pull out. And when you go there, they're so good about teaching you. You go and you read about all of these artifacts that they found and all of what they've gathered and all the knowledge they've recorded from the artifacts. And I just thought that was so beautiful. So I started to just look into that, do a lot of research, and I did find that the cultures that those artifacts came from was the foundation of the myth of El Dorado. And when you think that, people always think, oh, it's just somewhere in South America, but it's so deeply tied to like my community. And yeah, I just wanted to start doing a lot of studying. I still am doing a lot of studying because I'm so far removed, and that's just the product of being colonized. It's going to be a lifetime of research into where I come from and what I want to do in my artwork.
What is the myth of El Dorado?
Basically, that there was just a whole city made of gold, which is not true. But the little raft, the most famous like artifact in the museum is a depiction of these men on a gold raft, and they're just kind of going down this river, supposedly to this city of El Dorado that's just completely made of gold. And that's not really what was there, but the people were so heavily, I mean, that was so central to their religious practice. So gold was really revered. It was used only for the highest of the high in religious practices and religious leaders who were really political leaders at the time. There was no separation.
Wow. Thank you for explaining that. There's a street in Joshua Tree called El Dorado, and I know someone who lives
I
on
didn't
it.
even know that.
So I'm like, oh, I know a little bit more about maybe why it was called El Dorado.
Yeah, that's so cool. I'm gonna have to go check that out.
Yeah.
I've never been.
So when you left for college and you were gone for 5 years, and I guess you would come back holidays and breaks and things like that. But when you came back for good, like when you were graduating, was there a decision you had to make of, am I going to stay here in St. Louis and make it my life? Am I going to go back to the desert and make that my life? Am I going to go somewhere completely different and make that my life? Did that come up for you?
Absolutely. I was in St. Louis. I had another winter that was just really rough, and I was like, that's it. I have to go back to California. Yeah, I was traumatized. I really couldn't do it anymore. I was like, that was the year I slipped on ice for the first time. I was like, I had a car the last year that I was living there, and I was like, I really have to scrape, like in the movies, ice off of my car. No, thank you. I don't want to do any of that. So I was like, okay, I'm definitely moving back to California. So I moved here and I started living with my parents, and I was like, okay, this is temporary. I want to be in a bigger city like I was in the city in St. Louis and just sort of get back to that. But the more I looked into it, the more I just felt it was I don't know how to explain it, but it just didn't seem like the place where I wanted to be. The more I was in the desert, the more I confronted a lot of my past and a lot of insecurities that I had leaving. It was really interesting to see myself grow and really face a lot of the things that I felt were just beyond me in a way. And then I just started thinking about it, and I was like, what is there about LA or San Francisco that couldn't be here in the Valley? And then I started to see this movement of people that were like, create what you want and that you see in other places in your own spaces, because there's probably people around you who want those things too. So I was listening to that, hearing other people, meeting other people who were just like, the Valley has a lot of things that you can never find in the city. And I was eventually just like, yeah, you know what, this is it. Like, I'm going to create what I want here, because why should I go and be a part of it over there? That's not really my community. Those aren't the people that I know. Those aren't the people that know me. So it took a little bit, but I just eventually was like, the cities aren't for me. I'm one to build, and I want to build something for myself and my community here.
Are you involved with Wild Women and Michelle Castillo's group that we had on the last episode?
Yeah, actually, I just became part of leadership. I'm just starting super fresh, they put me like as financial. I mean, we're all co-leaders, so it doesn't matter, but I'm just starting out learning to manage their budget. So I'm really excited about that. That's something really new for me. I've always been a part of leadership, like in university. I was on like 5 different e-boards doing like crazy things. So I missed that a lot. So when I joined Wild Women and Michelle was like, would you be interested in being on leadership? I was like, absolutely. An artist women collective. There could be nothing better for me.
Right. So is that part of the community building that you were doing when you came back and getting involved back in the community that you had been away from when you were at school?
Yeah, absolutely. They were one of the biggest milestones that I had to really create the community that I wanted to be a part of here. Because when I first moved back, I only knew like one person. Everyone that I had grown up with also left, and they are still pursuing education and things like that. And slowly, some of them are coming back. But the first year, it was just me. And that was really stressful. It was a shock because I have always
my people.
yeah, I've always been super outgoing, and I'm just really friendly, and I love being out and about. And then for the first time it was like, where am I going to go? What am I going to do? And I really had to be just putting myself out there by myself, showing up to events. I didn't know anyone. I'd just be like, hi. And it took a while, but I found Michelle and through Brittany Delaney, who used to be one of the co-leaders. And it was like a breath of fresh air. Yeah.
She was great. We had a great time having her conversation.
I love Michelle.
There's a question that I float out there every once in a while about people coming to the desert either to run away from something or to run toward something. Is there any sense that you had that when you did go to St. Louis that you were running away from here, or when you came back, you were running back toward something?
Yeah, absolutely. I touched on it a little bit, but there were a lot of insecurities growing up that I was just tired of. Starting in a whole new space, that's really easy for me because when I stay in one place for too long, I sort of sit with myself and build things up in my head that are not reality, right? And I think a lot of people do that. They just overthink. So it was really nice to just take myself out for a while and just run away from a lot of things that I had built up in my head that were not real. And I think people do that coming here because the desert's a really healing space. Part of it's the climate. There's nothing better than warmth for your body. If I were to describe the desert, it's like when you walk into the sun for the first time in a while and you actually feel the sun on your skin, like that is here. And it's so healing. And I think people definitely come here to run away from something and just sort of take a deep breath and get back to who they were before, maybe. And I needed to do the opposite because I had always lived here. And then coming back, yeah, the more I reflect on it, it was me having to run towards and face a lot of things that I thought I wasn't. And I get really choked up. I'm sure you can hear, but it's really hard coming to like face your past if you were struggling with it.
For sure. Well, because it's so easy to just push it away or get distracted by other things and keep pushing it down instead of letting it be. And the desert, I mean, a lot of women that I've had on have talked about it. It strips away a lot of those layers that we put on top of ourselves to either hide things or just push things down and not face them. So,
yeah.
So your work has, I'd say it's a lot of people or body parts.
Yeah.
And a lot of women. So
yeah.
talk about the inspiration. Are you working in gold leaf? What are the materials you're using?
I reclaim sort of anything I find on the streets or thrift stores and use them as frames. So they might be frames traditionally, but sometimes I found the hood of a golf cart once and I was like, that's mine. That's going to be a frame. That's interesting. I found they were repairing one of the stop signs that were broken. I was like, well, that's now mine. They just left the broken one on the side of the road.
Oh my gosh, because I saw this. I'm like, that's the shape of a stop sign. So I saw that one on your website.
Yeah, I pick up anything and make it art, but that's part of the inspiration for me. But mostly it's the people around me, and I surround myself a lot with women because we are more empowering with each other, and there's just a different way of being when you're just surrounded by women. Everyone who's a woman has experienced that. You're just more free, you're more yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it was just trying to strip away a lot of that discomfort. So my process is that I take people who are really close to me. We do a photo shoot together. Usually I leave it up for interpretation, but usually it's women who are wanting to be completely themselves and just sort of explore a part of themselves that they haven't before. And so if they're comfortable with nudity, we'll do like a nude photo shoot. Mm-hmm. And it's really empowering. I did that for myself at the beginning because I was not comfortable asking anyone else to be nude unless I had done it. So I had a friend, I was like, I've always wanted to do this. What do you think? And they were like, yes, I'll photograph you. That's no problem. So I started with myself, and I started with just body parts because I didn't know what I wanted to really do as a whole. But it was so empowering because I had seen and read how people who do boudoir photo shoots, they just feel so much better about themselves and their body, that it was something that I wanted to do for other people, especially people that I know and that were interested in just becoming more comfortable in their own skin. So I started with myself, and then I just started asking friends to see if they were comfortable. And a lot of them were like, yes, I've always wanted to do it. Like, I've never known anyone, or I've never been comfortable enough to ask someone, because if you don't know a person, you just don't know where those things are going to end up. And if you have that trust with someone, this is for me and you, and this is for no one else. And I tell them, this is going to become art, but no one needs to know who you are unless you are okay with becoming the title. I'll title the piece after the person if they're comfortable with that. But for the most part, it's anonymous, very abstract. It's very figural, but unless you know the person, and I've had that happen where our friends, we know each other really well, mm-hmm. and they'll look at something and they're like, that's that person. I don't really like to tell anyone or do anything, but they can just tell from, it's just sort of like their essence, the way that they come across in something. So it's just a process of wanting to strip back and be more within yourself. So I like to do that and walk people through that process and see how it comes across in my artwork.
Yeah, they're really beautiful. If somebody wants to go out and look at them, where can they see them?
My Instagram at Puda Projects is probably the best and the most updated. My website is www.speakinsmoke.com. But like I said, that's not as updated. So I would definitely go on my Instagram more than anything. I'm constantly posting
spell Puda for them.
Puda is Pura, and then projects.
Awesome. Now, some of your work, you've also done some street art. How do those opportunities come to you?
Oh man, I've always been really drawn to it, but honestly, I've always been terrified of being arrested. So I've always watched Shepard Fairey and just local graffiti artists just come and go. I watch the streets a lot. I'm so intrigued by how people just have the audacity to be like, this is my space. And as a woman, it's intimidating, especially since you just don't know who's going to be out at the times that you could not get caught at. I try and do things in plain day, just in places where people wouldn't be. One of my favorite spots actually here in the Valley is at the edge of Desert Hot Springs, and it's an abandoned skate park that used to be a nudist colony.
Oh, wow.
And it's really interesting. You have to have an off-roading vehicle to get there because it's very bumpy and it's very desert and very uphill. I tried hiking it once in the dead of summer. I would not recommend that. Don't do that. I had to be saved by a bunch of skaters because I thought that was such a good idea. I really thought it was only half a mile. No, it was 3 or 4 miles in the middle of the day in the summer. Worst thing ever. But yeah, that's one of the best places to see desert graffiti artists. They just throw their stuff up there all the time. It's constantly changing. You'll see, tigers are really good, and graffiti artists are really good at putting the years, and you can just see how fresh it is. I go there every so often, and it's so beautiful to see how it changes. So I kind of built up the courage when I first got back to the Valley, learning about that space and just meeting other people. And I was finally like, you know what, I've always dreamed and just hoped, and you know what, now's the time to just actually do it. So the first time I like just completely cleared my Instagram and I posted one of my artworks was a street piece, and it said subjugate with your sexuality, and it was a nude photo of myself but rendered in art. And any woman that I knew just went crazy. They were like, yes, this is great. Like, they loved it. And I did it in like a tunnel somewhere in like the outskirts of LA with a skater who was confident that no one would be there and no one would bother me. Yeah, little by little, I've been trying to get back into it. It's, like I said, difficult for me because I just don't know how secure I'll be. And I don't know the streets, and I don't know anyone who really does that enough to take me out, because usually you find sort of like a mentor. Like, a lot of people I've heard have mentors. Actually, in Colombia, the last time I went, I did a workshop with a graffiti collective out there, and I made connections, and they were like, yeah, I'll take you out. I wasn't there long enough to do it, but that's usually how people get involved, and I just haven't found that here. So it's just a dream and something I'm working on to keep doing. I just love the audacity of it all.
Yeah. When I lived in LA, it would be a real treat when I would drive somewhere where I hadn't been before and maybe caught one of these alleys where work had been done. And I would always try and make a point to, and you know how try to find parking in LA is crazy, but I would try to find somewhere where I could pull over and just run out of the car and snap a few photos and then get back in the car. And I have on my Facebook page, I haven't had it in a long time just because I haven't been in places to do that, but I have a bunch of photos of that kind of artwork. And I ran into a guy once in the arts district, and I was coming down the street and I'm like, why is this, it's 90 degrees outside, dude's in black pants, black hoodie sweatshirt. He's even got like a scarf over his face and stuff. And he was working at that moment. Yeah.
Oh my God.
But I think a lot of them too, they want to remain anonymous. They don't want people
Yeah.
to know who they are. So it's just a really interesting community.
Yeah, I go back and forth because I wanted to sort of stay anonymous too. It keeps you safer, because if you do follow Shepard Fairey, he had a huge thing once he did really get famous. Cities on cities on cities slapped him with fines. He got hundreds of thousands of millions of dollars of fines from different cities because he went on huge campaigns when he first started, where he had hundreds of thousands of these things printed out, and he would go to all these major cities. And then once he became famous and all the cities knew his work, they were like, okay, time to find him, right? So then that's why these communities try and stay really anonymous more than anything, and they'll know each other within their own community. But I don't know, I'm back and forth. I want to do the work that I want to do. Sometimes I'm just kind of like, it doesn't matter. If I get caught, and I want to be one of those people, if you've heard about it, like soccer players, they have a fund for their fines so that they can curse out refs. I want to be like that. I want to get to a point where I'm comfortable in my life where I can just have like a screw it fund, and they can fine me for as much screwed up that I do, and just do it because I want to do it and not have to worry about it. That's definitely, I like the anonymity, but it's just too difficult to do for me because I don't want my artwork to change. I don't want to have two different artwork personas. I'm already known for what I do, and I don't want to have to change that just because I want to do a certain medium. And what folks might not know is I noticed that in September of 2019, you had work up here in the High Desert Nature Museum. Yeah, it traveled from the La Quinta Museum, had it first, and then they said, oh, they really liked the show as a whole, so we're going to move it up to the High Desert. And the artist just had to consent. And I was like, okay, yeah, I mean, that's beautiful. It was a tiny little piece. It was so cute. They asked me to be a part of the show, and I was like, I love it. That gallery is really great with me. They reach out all the time. Well, the La Quinta Museum, not the High Desert Museum. Oh, gotcha. But yeah, they're really great about reaching out when there's shows, and they're like, and that was one of them. It was really, really fun piece to do. That's cool. Well, unbelievably, we've come to the end. Oh my gosh. Yeah. That was awesome. But before I let you go, for my Patreon supporters, I'm going to pick out a couple of questions out of this magic jar that I have, and we'll select 4 numbers. I always get confused saying this because I say it so much. But if you're listening and you would like to be a Patreon supporter of the podcast, go to desertladydiaries.com, click on the support page, and you will find all the information there to sign up to be a patron. And if you're a patron,
you get to listen to the exclusive Diary Unlocked portion of the podcast where our guests answer 4 randomly selected questions. The first question, what or who inspires you? What gets you out of bed in the morning? Is this the life you thought you'd have when you were a teenager? And do you have any tattoos? Why or why not? And what are they? So if you want to hear Adriana's answers to those questions, again, go to desertladydiaries.com, click on the support page, and become a patron of the podcast. I had an enjoyable time with you. Thank you so much for coming on and talking about your background and your art.
No, thank you. Go support her, guys. Go to her Patreon. These questions are going to be interesting.
Yeah, if I can remember what they were. Okay. Thanks again. I really appreciate it.
So last week I mentioned that I was considering doing another Ask the Host episode like I did at the end of last year. If that's something you're interested in and you would like to ask me a question, send your question to desertladydiaries@gmail.com. Put Ask the Host in the subject line. I will collect them and then create an episode with answers to your questions. If you're enjoying this podcast, I hope you'll subscribe and share it with a friend. Thanks so much for listening.